Hey, so welcome to another episode of the Flow Tribe podcast. So, this is a special episode for me, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. And the reason it's special is because my guest today is Khanyisa Mnyaka. So, Khanyisa, first and foremost, is a friend. She's someone I met in 2013 when my family and I were living in Costa Rica. My wife at the time was attending the University for Peace. Yes, it's a real place, look it up. And Khanyisa was one of the students there. And Khanyisa and I connected. We actually became housemates for a while. She became a close friend to our family. We've stayed in touch over the years. And with everything that's going on in the world, I wanted to bring Khanyisa on this show to help, hopefully, with myself, first of all, to give me a sense of perspective on things, but also hopefully share this perspective with others and give other people a perspective on some of the things that are going on in the world right now. So the reason Khanyisa has a very unique perspective, first of all, let's mention the title of her book, which kind of explains it all. So the title of her book, which she authored, is Traveling While Black and Lesbian. So not only has Khanyisa traveled the world, she's traveled as a Black person, as she's traveled as a gay person. So she kind of and she's traveled as a woman. So I think she really checks all the boxes when it comes to understanding social diversity, social equality. And so I really wanted to bring her on to gain some of that perspective. So we talk about growing up gay in South Africa and what that was like. We talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and what her perspective on things is. And not only what's interesting is because this movement is so entrenched in the United States, Khanyisa is not American, though she is living in the United States now. So she has a very unique perspective because she's able to compare what's happening now to growing up in South Africa and having to live with, the energy of apartheid in that country. And so we dive into so much cool stuff. I think it was an amazing conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it too. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Khanyisa Mnyaka. So, hey, Khanyisa, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. So maybe we could start by having you just introduce yourself so people can get a better understanding of who you are and where you come from.
Amazing. So my name is Khanyisa, and that's actually how you say my name, Khanyisa, but I'm gonna forgive everybody who uses their accent to say it. I'm from South Africa, and I am currently in Seattle, Washington, because my girlfriend's family is here, and pre-COVID we were planning on coming and being here for a few months, and then COVID hits and we find ourselves still here and sort of pivoting through what that looks like for us. Back to myself. um, I am a traveler. I am a life coach. I am an author. I'm also an entrepreneur. I am all the things. And I'm also I think most importantly, the way that I love to sort of introduce myself is to say that I am a growing individual. I'm always seeking ways in which I can grow and learn and evolve. So, yeah, in whatever form that takes and whatever I need to be growing in.
Well, there you go. That's
Yeah.
you check a lot of boxes there.
Yeah.
So originally, so people know, we met, my gosh, I guess 7 years ago at this point.
Oh
Uh,
my God.
so 2013, we met in Costa
Yeah.
Rica while you and my wife were studying at the University for Peace. We got to
Yeah.
live together for a little while in our amazing compound of a
I
home.
know.
Uh,
It feels like
and
we sort of escaped real life a little bit.
Oh, I think, yeah, absolutely. That was not real.
Yeah.
That was not real.
That was not
No, it
real.
happened. It happened,
Yeah.
but we went into some
Yeah.
virtual world
And we
where
were like, oh,
yeah, and then we all
our
popped
own
out and
bubble.
just, what was that, right?
Yeah, I know,
Um,
right?
yeah, it took me,
Yeah.
honestly, it took me a few years to get over it. I
Mm,
felt like it was such a positive, powerful experience to be there
yeah.
and to connect with amazing people like you, and to go
Yeah.
back to the real world for me was very difficult.
Mm,
But I think that's maybe a big difference between you and I also, is that you've traveled a lot,
yeah.
right? And I think that you going there was just another travel for you. And I'd
Yeah.
like to go back. I'd really like to go back a little bit to the beginning. So you were born in South Africa,
Yeah. I was born and
right?
raised.
Born and raised in South Africa. And I think most people know that South Africa has its own history.
Yep.
its issues, correct?
Yep.
And I'm
Yep.
guessing that as a gay Black woman, growing up there was probably not the easiest thing in the world.
No, it wasn't.
And I'd like to, whatever you're willing to share, but I'd like to maybe share a little bit of that and to
Yeah.
see what the beginnings of Kanisa's life were like, so people can
Oh,
get some
little
perspective
Khanyisa.
on that. Little Kanisa, what was going on there?
So I feel like, I don't know if you've been reading my blogs recently. I've got into this place of just like complete transparency and honestly, and that has been very freeing and very powerful for me to live. So I don't no, I'm all down. We can talk about all of it. I was born and raised in South Africa. I was raised by my grandparents because I was born outside of marriage. My parents were teenagers. And the way that sort of works itself out in my culture, I'm actually Xhosa, that's my tribe. um, the mother's family takes responsibility of the child. So I was raised as their last born. And my grandparents were really poor. My grandmother was a prison cook for over 21 years, and my
Wow.
grandfather was a priest of this really, like, when you think priest now, these people are pimping. No, my grandfather was like a priest of a small church. Um,
I love the idea of
and
a pimping priest. That's
they
like,
are,
yeah,
though.
yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah,
pimping. I'm like, how
yeah,
do you have so much money? Where did my grandfather go wrong
yeah.
here? Like,
That's
this,
awesome.
obviously something didn't work out. But in terms of growing up in South Africa, I mean, it was great. For me, I had, your childhood is what it is until you compare it to other people.
Yeah,
Then you start realizing that, oh, this shit is fucked.
yeah,
And so for me, it was home. We didn't have much, but, I always had food. We struggled to get it sometimes, but it was there. And my mom, who was my real mother, she died when I was in my last year of high school. She had HIV and she lived through, I think, like just after 6 months of being diagnosed, she passed.
okay,
And that's where sort of like, I feel like from there, that's when my life started to unravel in the way that it did. Like, I went to university, luckily, thanks to my grandmother, graduated with a degree in psychology, and I struggled to get a job. So I was like sort of stuck with the depression of having just graduated. I think it took me a really long time to get a job, like the job that a graduate should have.
yeah,
And that led me to sort of like this, I was really, really depressed. And on top of that, I was this super closeted gay Christian child. And yeah, and so my travel really stemmed from that need to get away and to I almost said disappear, but just start over somewhere where I could be myself and make money.
yeah,
And so I went to South Korea, and I started as an English teacher, and that's where it all happened.
yeah. So
Yeah.
you have to leave your reality in order to create the reality that you're kind of meant to have, right?
I think so, especially if your reality is not supportive of that life that you want to live. I think
Did your family, like when you say closeted,
mm,
like how closeted, did your family know? Like nobody knew at
very.
all? Yeah.
No, dude, no, no one knew. I came out at 27 years old. I left South Africa when I was 25. I came out at 27. And I actually just recently came out to my grandmother a
Wow.
few months ago. And so, no, my family had no idea. I was so good at being a Christian that no one could have
Yeah.
thought. Like, I really was.
It's really
I
funny.
kicked ass at Christianing, but it's like, no one could have guessed that there was anything going on outside of that. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I became a Christian at, like, I want to say 14 years old. And I lived as such until end of university. Even like my first few months in South Korea, I was still closeted.
Okay.
And it took a lot of work for me to sort of like peel back the layers and the masks. We wear masks, right, when we're not being ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we do the work of living authentically, we have to peel all of those away. And then, you know, and
Yeah.
even that process it came with so much internalized repulsion to who I was, in terms of like, I don't know if you know the term internalized homophobia,
Sure.
where it's sort of like, oh, I know that I'm gay, but I don't really like seeing people be gay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there was so much work. I remember my first gay club in Korea. I was like, oh, this is it. Hell. This is what hell looks like. Gay men touching each other. And like, it took so much work for me to be accepting of that community. Like, it's such a weird internal struggle when we fight to be who we are versus who we are taught to be.
Yeah. And
Because
yeah, I'd be
yeah.
curious to know, like, because from the little bit I know, South Africa definitely has a negative stance against homosexuality,
Hmm.
as far as I know. I think
Hmm.
being gay in that country is probably harder than in other countries. Um, and I'd be curious to know if that influenced your decision to really keep it to yourself. Was there must have been a fear factor there in terms of the way you would be treated or the way you would be perceived?
I think it was more like really growing up Christian, because South Africa as a country, we have one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. Like,
Okay.
we same-sex marriage was legalized in like as early as 2003. We were one of
Oh
the
wow. Okay.
first countries but the issue that I have with that is our constitution reads beautifully and it's amazing, and it's like Nelson Mandela coming out of prison and being like, we're going to love everybody including the gays, but there was no education, right?
Yeah.
And so I can sit here and say South Africa is accepting of gay people. Of course, there are parts of it. If you go to Cape Town, but then even within Cape Town, you go to the location, which is equivalent of what a hood would be in America, where they still kill lesbians over there,
Yeah.
and it's still really, really hard. So I think our fear in South Africa is not so much that it's not accepted as a country, it is so that it's not accepted by the community
It's not
and
accepted socially.
socially. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a social issue. And like, my closet was basically in terms of that social,
Yeah.
aspect of it. Yeah. And I
It'll
was
add, I
also,
think you have to make that decision, right? Is
yeah,
that the second you come out in that way, you're adding a whole other level to your
yeah,
existence. You're adding
yeah,
probably a level of struggle, a level of having to fight for who you
yeah.
are. And it
And
probably
also,
makes it easier in some ways to not deal with that. But at the same time, you're still dealing with it because you're internalizing something that you
yeah.
should not have to
And you're
internalize,
not
right?
being yourself. And the
Yeah.
thing is, for me, I think it was really losing the people that I loved in the process, because all my friends were church friends, right?
Yeah.
And so it was, if I come out, there's a chance that these people will not accept me and these people will not be in my life anymore. And
Yeah.
we are creatures of companionship.
Of
So
course.
we don't really want to challenge anything that will make us not accepted or feel like we belong in any group. But we're not being ourselves, so we're not accepted or belong in the group. So it's
Yeah.
a very like weird psychological thing that we have to go through when we come out.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so you came out at 27, officially. I mean, obviously, there were some people at that point who probably knew, and you had,
Yes, the
yeah,
people I had interactions with
yes,
physically.
yeah.
Uh,
I hope they knew.
right.
Yeah. And what made you decide? Was it just, hey, you know what? It's time. I feel
I
confident. I feel capable at this
yeah.
point.
I feel like I was 27 years old, and then at that time I was in a very serious relationship. That's when I was with Julie,
Yeah.
and we were living together in South Korea. And at that point, we had been together for, I want to say, about 2.5 years. And I literally was just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I am done pretending that I live with my best friend in a studio apartment. Like, that doesn't even make sense. We sleep on the same bed. And I was like, this is not doing me any favors by hiding who I am to my family. My coming out was like, at that point, I'd already had a community of gay people,
Yeah.
straight people. I had made straight friends who didn't give a flying fuck who I was actually. Like, they were just my friends. And
Yeah.
so, in terms of having a community and a supportive structure, I was all good and well. But it was just really coming out to my family and saying, this is who I am. And my brothers knew, my cousins knew, my sisters knew. It was just like the old
Yeah.
people in the
Of course.
family. Um,
And
yeah,
how
so
was
my
that?
coming,
Was there like a was there a sense of liberation that just kind of like, wow, how come I didn't do this sooner? Or did you feel like, nope, this was the right time and I'm able to deal with it now?
oh yeah, definitely. For me, it was definitely like, I always say that I respect people who come out younger.
Yeah.
I have so much love and respect for those kids who stand in their truth, knowing that they are from, very homophobic families, and some of them actually get kicked out of their houses and stuff. Like, I have so much love and respect for those kids. But for me, I feel like I made the right decision because I was empowered. I didn't need anything from anybody. I had
Yeah.
my own home, I had my own job, I had my own money. I had worked through this need to have people's opinions sway me in my life. Like, I was grounded already. So I was old enough to just say it in terms of informing than asking for permission to be
Yes.
myself.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, it was like, you're going to go to hell, Jesus hates you, and all of this and all of that stuff. But it came when I was already very strong. I cried. Of course, it hurt to hear all that stuff from, people that I loved, but it wasn't painful enough for me to feel all alone. I already had people who, like, my friends came over with wine and we're celebrating my coming out. So it was more like, it hurt how they responded to it. I came out to my dad, because that time I'd only come out to my aunt, and she's the one who was like, "You're gonna go to hell" and all these things.
Yeah.
And when I went home, I brought Julie to South Africa right after coming out to her, and we went as friends to my grandmother. And my aunt was like, "Fine, you can be gay as long as you're happy, but don't tell anyone else. This can be our little secret," right? So we were even going to my dad's house, and my dad parents were not married, so my dad has his own family. I didn't come out to them. My sisters knew that, who Julie was, but my dad was like, "Oh, Khanyisa is just bringing home an American friend of hers."
Yeah.
And but this time I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I am bringing my friend home. India and I went home to South Africa. So I came out to everyone, including my grandmother and my dad. And I was like, this is who she is. And also, she's much younger. She's 10, like 9.5 years younger than me. She's white. And it just would not have made sense for me to be like, I'm bringing my best friend home.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how is
It
she your
doesn't
best
make
friend?
sense.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? It doesn't make sense. And I was like, I'm also very tired of just, I was like, either you accept me with this
Or you don't.
or you don't.
Yeah.
Like, and my dad was like, I don't want to meet your partner. He made like culture and tradition as an excuse, like a
Yeah.
scapegoat, saying like, we don't do this. And I was like, if you don't want to meet my partner who I spend 99% of my time with, then you don't get to see me as well. So I didn't see him when I went home.
Yeah. See, I think what you touched on is something that a lot of people can learn from, and I think a lot of people struggle with is this idea that in order to live your authentic self, you have to do some work sometimes.
Yeah.
I think some people are very lucky that, they're very comfortable with their truth and they're just able to have that confidence. But I don't
Hmm.
think that's the majority of people.
No.
And I think that what you talked about is sometimes, you do struggle. You struggle with the truth coming out will provide one type of struggle, and me keeping it to myself will provide another type of struggle.
Yeah.
Right? And at different points in your life, maybe one struggle is easier to handle than the other. Like when
Yeah.
you were younger, maybe keeping that to yourself was easier. You're like, you
Yeah.
know what, I'm willing to struggle internally for some of the facilities I will have externally, right?
Hmm.
And then you got to a point in your life where you were well surrounded, you had the community around you,
Hmm.
you had, and I think that's huge. I think so many
Yeah.
people who struggle with, the type of thing you went through are alone, where there's a real sense of loneliness.
Mm.
And it's like, hey, if I come out now, no one's got my back. No
Yeah.
one's going to wait for me with some wine to celebrate this
No.
event. It's going to be
No.
like, it's going to be super
It's
negative,
gonna
and there
be
might,
shitty. Yeah.
yeah, it's going to be really shitty. And I think there'll be a huge amount of regret. And look,
Mm.
as someone who's never had to go through any of this, I'm just speaking from what I think would happen. But I don't think it's just about being gay or that type of thing. I think it's
Yeah.
anytime you're holding something back,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
just I
And I think
just did
we've
a
all gone
video on
through that
coming
at
out.
some point,
I think so too. I think we've labeled coming out as this thing that gay people go through. I
Yeah.
think coming out is whatever it is that you feel like will make you unaccepted or
Yeah.
loved less, or that you are not enough, or that you don't belong. You have to come out of like something. There's, Naved had to come out to his family for not being Muslim, and
Yeah.
they took that really, really hard,
Yeah.
as if he had said he was gay.
So for people
And
who don't
so,
know, Naved was a friend of ours in Costa
yeah,
Rica. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And so we all have a story that we are scared to share,
Yeah.
whatever that is,
Yeah.
so.
And speaking of stories, so we've touched on the fact that you're gay and gone through struggles
Yes.
there. But
Yes.
these days, I'd say there's a movement that's pretty powerful and is taking up a lot of space, which is the Black Lives Matter
Mm.
movement. And you're also Black, obviously. And
Yes.
so I'd like to touch on that. This is something we briefly talked about before we started recording, which was that as a straight white man, I don't, I haven't had too many struggles that were imposed on me by
Yeah.
society,
Yeah.
right? I'm a pretty, I'm in a good place as far as
Yeah.
that goes. I've had my own struggles with other things, but, so I'd be curious to know, with everything that's going on, I'd love to hear your perspective on things and some of what we're seeing in the world and some of the changes that we're seeing, but also
Mm.
some of the resistance that we're seeing to this type of movement.
Mm.
And as someone who has traveled a lot, and I'd be curious to know, how you're perceiving all of this.
I think it's very interesting for me to be in America and sort of like compare the Black Lives Matter movement to apartheid, or like where we are as a country in South Africa, because I'm very aware of the fact that I am not from here. And understanding that the Black Lives Matter movement started in South Africa, but I keep having to draw those parallels of how we went down that road. And also, it's like, it's so weird for me. I remember the first time I saw a sign that said Black Lives Matter, and I was like, wait, I'm Black. And I remember being, someone has to be told that my fucking life matters. And I was so shocked being in America and seeing people fight over that statement and being like, no, all lives matter. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not dying with a knee on your neck on the street. Like, you're not watching your people look like you go through this stuff. And so I think that it is such a powerful movement. The only thing that gets me a little like resistant to the movement is this, and I hope I can say it in a way that is as a bit easy to understand. I get worried when people's lives start becoming an economical issue. And I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement is happening in that way as well. If you just like see how these big corporations were very anti-gay, and all of a sudden when it became cool to like gay people, they profited from liking gay people, right? And now it is cool to support the Black Lives Matter movement. They making shitloads of money from supporting it. So I'm just like, very wary of having my life as a political statement, and also my life just feel someone's pockets, right? And it's I think it's such a push and pull, because you're like, yeah, if you have financial backing as a movement, things change. But then you're like, how much of it is just financial, or you actually believe what you say? I'll give you this example. I went with Julie Naved and her brother to a fundraiser in Boston once a few years ago. And this lady was like, oh, I work for a nonprofit and we invest in Black people, gay people, like just minority groups, right? And she shares this bill. So I'm sitting there, I'm wearing a suit. I'm like, yo, I'm so glad I gayed up for this, like super gay looking. This is gonna be easy. And so she does her thing, and then we were allowed to talk to them after the thing. She spent all her time talking to white men and taking their questions, completely avoiding us. And I got to a point where I was like, I feel like I'm chasing her, and it shouldn't be like that. And so for me, it was like, you ignored the people that you work for after you had said you worked for these people, and then spent the rest of your time there.
Because
You
that's
know
where the
what I
money
mean?
was, right?
Because that's where the money was.
She
And
had to
that's,
convince them this was important, or else the
yeah.
funding, you guys weren't going to fund her thing,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So
It's so
that's
weird for
messed
me
up.
because
Yeah, that's messed up.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's really messed up. And I was like, not even saying like, oh, you should invest in what we're doing or whatever, but it's like, hear us out,
yeah.
talk. And so I'm always very in terms of like how much of it is just for the financial side of things, and how much of it do you really believe in this message of Black Lives Matter, which I think it's crazy that we even have to say it. It's crazy that we even have to convince people that Black Lives Matter, right? It's crazy that we have to have signs and proof and all these things, and people are out there being like, no.
Yeah, and I think as again, someone who, and I didn't grow up, I grew up in suburban Montreal, Canada, which
Yeah.
not much going on there in terms of racial equality or any of that stuff. And it really, I honestly can say, I don't think racism really hit me until I was much, much older. And the
Mm.
one example I can give that I think I mean, obviously, it exists, but if you don't see it in your society as
Yeah.
often as like even like in Montreal, like most communities, there's segregation.
Yeah.
The Black communities are in one part of the city, and obviously you'll see Black people all over, but where the concentrations happen, and that's usually
Yeah.
where the racial profiling happens and all that.
Mm.
I never really witnessed it. I didn't
Yeah.
go to those parts of town. Like it wasn't something that I witnessed often enough to really feel what it was,
Yeah.
until a friend of mine who I met who was Black, and he was a very successful businessman and did very well in life and the nicest person you could know. And he had a really nice sports car, that he
Mm.
bought for himself with hard-earned money. And we were talking one day and he's like, oh, I got pulled over again. What do you mean again? He's like, oh, dude, it's at least a few times a month, if not more, where I get pulled over for no reason other than, oh, we're just doing a routine check. Right. And he told me, he's like, that's what it is to be a successful Black man. You
Yeah.
will deal with that.
Yeah.
Police don't like people
Yeah.
driving nice cars if you have
Yeah.
the color of skin that I have,
Yeah. I mean, there are
you
people
know?
here who've been asked if they were breaking into their homes when they had keys in their
Yeah.
hands,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, it's really crazy.
So that's where for me, when, we talked about how you appreciated that I had this perspective, I
Yeah.
think that's it. Or I think it's, and something I think about too is, yes, Black Lives Matter, but I also have friends who are just dark skinned, right? Who are Armenian or from an Arab country.
Yeah.
And, another friend of mine who's a very successful businessman, who's Armenian, who has slightly darker skin, said 1 out of 2 times he goes through the airport, he is pulled aside and searched.
Mm.
Like and this guy's in a suit and he's like, couldn't look more professional, but yet
Mm.
because of his name and the color of his
They
skin,
think he's a criminal.
he's pulled aside and searched, is where
Mm.
none of his white colleagues ever are,
Yeah.
and so I think those are the stories for me that over time you start to realize, like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I get it. I get the privilege that I have,
Yeah.
that, I've never had to deal with that.
Yeah.
But I also think that when you see a movement like this starting to happen, I get where the anger comes from. I get where the
Yeah.
frustration comes from. Though
Yeah.
I've never lived it and probably never will, I can definitely appreciate it. And I think
Yeah.
that I hope that more people can be exposed to those stories from people that they know. because
Yeah.
that's the most powerful way to really connect with
Yeah.
what's going on,
Yeah.
rather than have to read about it or watch it on TV, you know?
Or to say it's happening. I remember the first time where when India and I traveled, we went to Bali, and she saw how I was being treated differently from her because she was a white tourist. And she was like, I knew racism existed and I knew that. And she was like, but I didn't get to feel it as much as I do being with you, and just watching how life looks like for you. She's like, I've had, Latino friends, Mexican friends, I've had black friends, but I've never really understood the struggle of being a black person until being with you and seeing how the world responds to you, because we spend all our time together. We love each other, and she gets to see people treat me differently just because I'm black. Like living in Australia, if we dude, I can write a book about how racist Australia is,
Really?
right? And Australian racism is very dangerous because it's very subtle. It's not like in your face racism. Like, you're not going to be driving through Texas and someone's going to be like, yo, and call you the N word. It's very like, oh, we're not going to give you a job. We're not going to talk to you. There's no space for you in this society. It's very structural.
Yeah.
And the way even their immigration works. Like, I was shocked to find out that the South African government before this went to Australia to study apartheid.
Oh,
We
wow.
learned it from them. That's how racist the country is. Like, up until about 40 to 50 years ago, they had a policy in their immigration that's called the white only policy, where they were only allowing white people to live in Australia who are not from there, which then explains why after apartheid, a lot of white South Africans moved to Australia. And
Because they're like, oh, wow, that sounds awesome.
yeah,
That's where I'm going.
they're
Yeah.
like, oh, apartheid is ending. We'll give asylum. They actually gave asylum to white South Africans, and we had a peaceful transition of power.
That's
But they're
crazy.
like, it's going to be dangerous from them. And so I think that the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, is all encompassing, and that's why I like people you saying, black and brown lives, because I'm not brown, I'm black.
Yeah.
And I think that when you then say all brown people are black, you take away from the experience of black people, which I don't want to compare pain, but if I had to, we would fucking win.
Yeah.
And so, like, and if we can understand that, like, Armenian, Asian, if you are not looking like Patrick, you're screwed. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it's sort of like, we have to do it all together, black, white, green, orange. I've honestly we were in Portland when it all started. It gave me so much joy to see everybody in the streets fighting for Black Lives Matter, like everybody getting into trouble. The news, white people building walls in front of black protesters, like that has been just like, wow,
Yeah.
I get it. And it also gives me so much hope because it's young people
Yeah.
who are doing this. And I'm like, we're gonna be okay, I think.
I'd say another positive thing that's come out of this is the opportunity to learn. And what I mean
Yeah,
by that is now, because this became a thing, suddenly there are more podcasts devoting their time and their guests
yeah,
to learning more about these issues, right? Like, I've listened to black politicians on podcast interviews. I never would have listened to that, or they never would have been interviewed before,
yeah,
right? Suddenly it's a hot
yeah.
topic. So everybody, that's why I invited you. It's the only reason I invited you. Just
Well,
kidding.
thanks
No,
for
I'm
bringing
just
that,
kidding.
Kanye.
But I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But what I mean is, suddenly these podcasts that I listen to, just because they entertain me, suddenly they're inviting guests who are very well versed in these topics, who
Yeah.
have a very good understanding of the history of living as a black person in America.
Mm,
And to hear the statistics, to hear the stories, wow. Like, I
yeah.
honestly, in the last few months, have an
It's been.
entirely new perspective on it, because I've heard just how ridiculous it is,
Have you watched
and
13th?
I don't think so. No.
You need to watch that. It's
Okay.
about the 13th amendment, which is the abolition of slavery.
Right.
there's a provision there that says unless you are a criminal.
Yes.
And then that led to the
Suddenly the prisons.
mess, the
Yeah. Yes,
prisons,
I
man.
have
It's
heard
like,
that. Yeah.
what
Oh
the
no, it's
fuck?
ridiculous. And
It's
even if we look
ridiculous.
at the privatization of prisons now that's going on in America, and
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into it because I don't know enough about it to really have, I think, a proper conversation about it.
Mm,
But I think, yeah, like what I said is, and I think that's on us, right? As the white privileged, I think it's our responsibility now at this point to start by education.
mm,
You know, it's one thing to just, because I look, I agree with the protests. I'm completely on board with most of that. And I say most because I think a lot of people do love the idea of going out to protest no matter what the cause, right? There are people that have anger, and this is a great way for them to vent some of that anger. And I think that's not necessarily authentic a lot of the
mm,
time. I think the majority of the people in those protests are there for the right reasons. Um, and I think it's more, for me anyway, it's more, first of all, I want to learn more about why is this happening,
mm,
right? What does Black Lives Matter really mean versus just writing a poster and holding it up? Like, I want to
mm,
educate myself first
mm,
so that I can have a much clearer understanding of what we're fighting for. And now
mm.
that I have that, okay, now what's a way that I can somehow help,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, I don't know, honestly, especially in the days of COVID now, where we're kind of limited in our interactions, we're limited by our actions.
Mm,
I think it's more, step one is educate yourself, right? The more
yeah.
people who are able to understand what this means, that's how we're going to affect change, right? And I
Yeah.
think that, like you said before, also the monetization of Black Lives Matter is getting, yeah,
Mm.
it's hard to know, right? It's hard to know,
Yeah.
like,
It's really
okay,
hard.
I get it. I get that you're doing
Yeah.
this. It's the same way that we're all in this together has become the new COVID slogan for every single company on earth,
Right.
right? And like,
And everyone
really,
is
are
selling
we in
masks.
this together? Like, if I'm having a hard time because of this, can I come to you and you'll do something for me?
No,
Probably not,
no, no, no.
Yeah, exactly. So
No.
I think for me, it's really that. It's more about, hey, first of all, I want to learn more about this. I want to
Yeah.
understand why my Black friends have gone through the struggles that they've gone through,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
then
I think it's
once,
educating ourselves and educating the people around us as well.
yeah. And I think that I think someone said, and I'm probably going to mess it up, but it's more like, if you don't stand up against racism, you are part of racism,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to say, I'm not racist, but if you see it, if
Yeah.
someone else is doing it, then you have a responsibility to say something about it,
Yeah.
right? I
You
think
really do.
that's where real change happens. I think it's easy to be in a white community surrounded by white people and be like, I don't like racism.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's like, oh my God, me too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, Karen.
Okay. But yeah, and I totally get that. And
Yeah.
I think again, it's, for me, it's really that. It's been, holy shit, there's
It's been
so much.
shocking. Like when it started, I watched Indy go like full blown on some of her family members. Like, how can you not see that you're being racist? And they're like, I'm not being racist. I just think that these people, and she'll be like, who are
Yeah,
these people?
yeah,
That's racist. And also, I know that she's not the only one who's had to go through these super difficult conversations with their families, right? I watched this, I think she was 16 talking to her dad, and she put it on video, and her dad was like, they're gangsters and hooligans, and I know some of them are very nice. And she just went in, she was like, Dad, you're very racist. And
yeah,
it was crazy. But I do think that I believe in the power of conversation and talking. Silence destroys us and it kills us. But the more we talk, the more we fight, the more we have these conversations. Like you being like, I don't know what to do. Me and you having this conversation and you putting it out there for people who would normally not listen to a conversation with a Black person, right?
yeah.
That's doing something right there
Yeah, that's
because,
my feeling anyway. I'm trying. But I think what you're saying too is really, it's about conversation, the power of conversation.
yeah,
Like I said,
absolutely.
to reach out to people who have stories that I've never lived,
Mm,
and to know what struggles you've had as a gay person, the struggles you've had as a Black person. I think
yeah.
that the more I can learn from other people, the more informed I become, the more enlightened I become. And
Mm.
then I'm in a position to do something about it because I'm educated. I'm
Yeah.
doing it for the right reasons, and I'm doing it from a perspective of love, really, and to just
Mm.
better understand the world around me. And I think that through conversation, you'll influence people in a much greater way than through, well, violence, first of all, obviously, through confrontation,
Mm.
through media, which
Yeah.
is, obviously somehow I'm being manipulated, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, but I'm never going to trust, if any type
Yeah.
of scripting or any type of thought went behind what you're putting out into the world, I'm going to doubt it a little
Yeah,
bit,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
And I think some companies really mean it. I really think some
Yeah.
companies are, oh, they were already supporting it, and they just decided, hey, let's make some noise about
Yeah.
this because we're in a
Yeah.
position to do so.
Yeah.
And I really believe that. I really believe
Yeah.
that even some big corporations didn't
Yeah.
just do this to profit. I really think it's because they believe it.
Yeah.
But I think the opposite is also true. But even if it's not authentic, can
We'll
it
take their
have?
money.
Yeah, we'll take their money, and we'll take
Yeah.
the message that's going out into the world,
Yeah. We'll
right?
take it.
Like, it doesn't, in the end, whether they profit from it or not or whatever, if that message has some sort of positive influence, then so be
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we're going we'll get it right one day. I'm just like, in terms of the violence of the protests, though, I think it's been frustrating for me to hear people be like, why do they have to be violent? I'm like, we're angry.
Yeah.
Black people are not angry. We're fucking pissed off.
No.
And that anger will manifest in some sort of violence. Like, and I hate it when they were like, well, Martin Luther King wasn't violent. I'm like, yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Or they'll say Nelson Mandela was. Oh, I hate it because they're like, well, if you look at Nelson Mandela, I'm like, he was militant. He had an entire army that they started as the ANC that got banned and was like still operating underground. Like, he was violent. When you have people who have been so underserved, so looked down upon, who have had to literally struggle off chains to be seen as human beings. Like, you think it's like 400 years ago, America and the world, they've just changed the handcuffs that they used, or they just changed what the chains look like on Black people, but they've never released them.
Yeah.
So we are constantly fighting to be seen as human beings. And it is frustrating to just be like, yo, I am a person. And so obviously we're going to start fucking shit up.
Yeah.
You know me, I'm not violent, I'm peace and love. But
Yeah.
I get angry and I get violent, and I understand where that is coming from. And I think white people who are like, I'm part of the movement, but I don't agree with the violence, understand. I'm not saying you have to agree with the violence. I'm just saying you have to take time to see where it comes from. Anger is a way we sometimes manifest pain.
Absolutely. And I think
And
emotion is a very, very powerful thing, and it can be
yeah,
expressed in many different ways. And I think that the anger and the pain that you're talking about is an old pain, right? It's an
yeah,
old energy that's been around for a very long time. And someone who really believes in these ideas of energy and collective consciousness, I think that once you tap into that energy and that anger, you're not only tapping into your own anger, but you're tapping into a collection of anger that has been around for a very, very long
yeah,
time. And that, in some, as human beings, that's going to elicit violence. It's going to
yeah,
elicit frustration. And the escalation of that frustration is going to lead to things getting fucked up. But like you
yeah.
said, I think in some cases, I think it's necessary,
Hmm.
right? I think it's necessary because people need to understand just how terrible this is, right? And if some of these protests, and you have to make noise, right?
Hmm.
And unfortunately, sometimes making that noise has consequences.
Yeah.
Um,
And the thing is, we've been marching. We've done the peaceful stuff. We've
yes.
done the peaceful marches. We've done the signs. Isn't it surprising that the only time that we're starting to see real change is when people got violent,
Yeah.
right?
And yeah,
And
and I even think the
it's sad
violence,
that it had to take that.
yeah, but even the violence, I mean, as someone who followed it, I didn't follow it as, attentively as some, but I don't think it was all violence. I saw a lot of respect, and I saw a lot of attempts to be nonviolent,
Yeah.
which and the escalations happened on the other end,
Yeah.
right? The escalations were first of all from the people trying to abolish these protests and trying
Mm.
to, and it was triggered, right? And that violence often was a resistance to another violence
Yeah.
that was being done to them. And I think
Yeah.
that's the history of it, right? That's the history
Mm.
of this story, is
Yeah.
that, sometimes in order to unfortunately deal with one form of violence, the only way to go back is to do the
Yeah.
same thing back to them,
And I think also it's frustrating and for Black Americans too is that well, I'm here now, is that the people who do start the violence are backed by the president. And
Yeah,
so
okay. I'm not going to get into that because I think
I
that's,
never, yeah,
yeah.
but I do feel that the
Oh, and that's the
powers
thing
that
too. And I think there's
are in
yeah.
place right now are not the most, let's just say it's not a really good time to have the type of leadership
Oh, there's
that
definitely
America
a
has.
separation here in the sense
Yeah,
that, and there are parts of this country or even parts of the world. I mean, as a Canadian, I'm not going to speak as an American because I'm not. But even in
yeah,
Canada, look, people think Canada, no, there's tons of racism.
right.
Even in Montreal, where I'm from, especially in the French Canadian community, I've seen a lot of racism, not just towards Black people, but towards Muslims. There's, and again, also at the political level, it was supported. Racism was supported politically
Mm,
for a long time in Quebec. And so, I think it's something that's systemic, everywhere you
yeah,
go. In many countries in Europe will have this
everywhere. In
everywhere,
South Africa, everywhere.
everywhere. And I think it's part of, unfortunately, part of the human experience is resisting the difference,
Mm,
resisting what is different from us, and not accepting someone who has a different, sexual, they're from, they're homosexual instead of being straight, or they're Black instead of being white, or they're brown, or everyone is going to resist what is different from them, right?
which is
In
so
some way.
ridiculous to me. I'm like, how does that affect you? If we were to think about it in terms of like, oh, Kanye is gay, Patrick is straight.
Yeah.
How does Kanye's gayness personally affect you?
Yeah. Well, we can talk about girls together in a cool way. And I do remember you checking out a girl and once we were together and I was
I
like,
know.
oh, that's awesome,
I know. I remember we'd hang out with Ahmed. I'm like, check her out. He'd be like, I've never had a lesbian friend
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
This is
yeah, yeah.
great.
This is great.
Yeah.
No, I know.
Yeah.
We're joking. Joking aside, though.
Yeah.
No, and that
Say,
again, and the same thing goes for the color of the skin. Like, how, in what way does this affect our relationship? How, in what way does this make you different than me?
yeah. Or
You
more
know?
superior.
And I think one thing that gave me also a huge perspective change was when I studied biology. And I remember not long after being in university and being in this program and learning about cells and learning about the insides of the human being and learning about, everything that really, it takes a really long time when you're studying the biological aspects of a human being to get to the skin,
Hmm.
right? Like you start at the cellular level and then you go
Hmm.
up and up and up, and then you're looking at bones and organs and there's all of these things. And then you finally get to the skin, and then you get to pigmentation, and you get to why some people have this color of skin and why people have this color of skin. But by the time you get to that, you realize like, holy shit, we are all the same.
Like
Like
literally.
if you put me and you in a blender and blend it all up, you
Yeah.
couldn't tell the difference. Like it's just like a weird blender that just brings us
I know.
back to
I was about to
but
say I should not have had the visual for that.
yeah. No, but you know what I'm saying? Like if you go into
Yeah.
like more of a genetic blender, if you would, there's no way to tell the difference. If my skeleton is next to your skeleton, there's no way to tell the difference.
Hmm.
Like the difference between me and you is a biological thing called pigmentation.
Yeah.
That's it.
Caused by where we were born and
That's it. Yeah.
moved
Caused by
to. And
some sort of genetic thing that
yeah.
happened, millions of years ago that suddenly separated different humans because of where they lived,
Yeah.
right?
It's the
Because of the
weather.
influences of their environment. That's
Yeah.
what the difference is.
Yeah.
And so I think that gave me a really good perspective as well.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think, again, it's education.
It
And
is
as long
education.
as,
And I think part of that education has a lot to do with unlearning. I think for all of us, for just Black people unlearning what it means to have this body and be in this skin, And I feel like white people unlearning that it's just skin. It doesn't make you superior. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you anything. It's just the color of your skin. You know, in South Africa, one of the apartheid guys was like, we actually had two different education systems. One was for blacks, it was called the Bantu education. The other one was for white people. And he said, because the black mind cannot comprehend complex issues like maths and physics. So we're just going to teach them 1 plus 2, you know, we'll just teach them just basic maths. And so that you imprint into both minds that this one is superior and this one is inferior. And so we navigate our worlds looking at each other in those terms. And so I think the work is for all of us to unlearn that stuff.
Yeah, and I think also when you deal with, let's say, wherever you grew up, I mean, if you grow up with racist parents who are
Yeah.
constantly reminding you that these people are a different way, then you're going to have most likely racist children who grow
Yeah.
up to be racist adults who will end up raising racist children.
Yeah.
And that I think is
Yeah.
probably the most difficult cycle to break,
Yeah.
right? Because now you're talking about very close knit groups
Yeah.
that have this generational aspect to their to the influence of the children and the generations, right? And I think that to me is where this type of movement will hopefully start to break through
Yeah.
because of the media, right? I think that's where
Yeah.
we have a way through these tools, through this technology, to reach through some of those barriers. And I think that's why you have to find creative ways to do it. You have to find positive ways to do it, right? And be creative in the way that you reach out and use comedy and use entertainment and
Yeah.
use, because if it's all the hard, serious stuff all the time, a lot of people just aren't going to watch,
Yeah.
right? And I think that especially if you're talking about children, if you're talking about getting through to communities that have been generationally racist, I think the one way to do that is to hopefully, I don't know, like, I don't know what it
Yeah.
is. Obviously, I don't have the answers, but,
It's been
you know,
very interesting. It's been very interesting to watch. And like,
and there's a
baby,
lot of angles. People are coming at it from all these different angles. So
yeah.
it's kind of cool. It's kind of, some's going to work and some aren't, but at
No.
least there's new ways, there's new messages going out into the
Yeah.
world. And I think that's
And
really
there's also
positive.
like new, like loads of people like back to who are doing the work. I know there's like loads of underground um, grassroots movements, sorry, that are doing amazing work out there with all the movements, the gay movements, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, Kanisa, I think we reached the end of our time for this
Thank you.
episode,
This
but
was fun.
this was amazing. I think you have such a
Yeah.
beautiful story to tell. I think people can learn from people like you. And what I've always admired about you was your strength. I feel like from the first day I met you in Costa Rica, you had a strength, and I know like it took a while for you to get there, but I think when we
Mm.
met, you were probably in a good place. At
Yeah.
least that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I always admired you for being authentically you. I
Yeah.
never met anyone like you before, to be honest.
Oh,
Like I said, a Black gay woman who's traveled all over, and to just to have gotten to know you then and to continue to be your friend is really cool.
cool.
And
Thank you so much.
so
I'm
thank
coming
you
to
for
visit.
doing this, and I
And
can't wait
also,
to
I
share
wanted to
this.
tell
Yeah,
you, you were my very first Muay Thai trainer.
yeah, I know,
And I
I
just
know.
fell so in love
Yeah,
with it. And I've
yeah,
been lucky to do it since then.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And I
yeah.
think again, that was a magical place that we lived in, and it
Yeah,
wasn't
it really
real,
was.
unfortunately, but
I
but
know.
we
Take me
learned,
back. I
a
want to go
lot. Yeah.
back. I want to go back into
Oh,
hiding.
it's unbelievable. But listen, how can people connect with what you're doing? I know you have a
Um,
blog you mentioned, you have a book.
mm,
I will put all the links in the show notes, but I just want to make sure that people can connect with you.
I have a book that's on Amazon. It's called Traveling While Black and Lesbian. I'm mostly on Instagram. I am working on my website that should be coming out in a few weeks.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the best
Awesome. So
way.
I'll make sure the links are available. And
Yeah.
all right. Well, thanks so much, and we'll talk
Thank
soon.
you. Bye.